narrow trail through the trees ended in a long basin. Grass-covered basin scattered here and there with clumps of trees and brush. On the far side, nestled across the corner of the mountain, was a cabin. A lazy trail of smoke mounted toward the sky. "You kicked in an anthill," Pike commented. "Castle will have men riding the hills hunting you." Lachlan had been thinking of that, and now they drew up in the shadow of some pines and studied the cabin and its vicinity with careful attention. A saddled horse was tied near the corral, and 3 horses were loose in the corral. As they watched, 2 people came into sight, a girl from the cabin and an Indian from the rocks in their cliff. "That's the Indian you spoke for, Jim. I knew that odd limp anywhere." They had no sooner broken from cover than they were seen. The girl started toward the cabin, but something was said by the Indian to stop her, and she turned back. What he expected, he was not sure, but certainly not what he found. She was a tall, beautifully shaped girl with a dark skin from which her gray eyes were both startling and lovely. She studied him carefully as he drew near, but she was by no means frightened. She had poise in manner and seemed perfectly sure of herself. The Indian was wearing a gun now. "Howdy, ma'am," Jim said. "I'm Lachlan. I own this place." "I know who you are. I own this place. That's a matter of discussion. Get down and come in, will ya?" Patch told me what you did for him. Inside, she busied herself putting food on the table and getting coffee started. "I'm Army Lachlan. Army short for Armorel. The Lachlan because I was married to your brother." "You were what?" "We were married the day he disappeared. He got word of trouble at the ranch just after reaching town. He left me in a town and rushed back to the place and right into an ambush. He was shot down, got away into the brush, and that was the last he was seen." "I don't know what to say. George said nothing of you in his letters." She smiled bitterly. "He did not know me then. I came to Toyabe to marry Reed Castle, but we did not see eye to eye on several subjects, and I refused to go through with it. Reed became angry and threatened me, but then they tried to get the people at the hotel to turn me out. George had had trouble with Reed, so that when he heard of it, he came to me and offered his assistance." Her eyes turned to Jim. "I was alone in the world, and it had taken the last of my money to come here from San Francisco. I told George I did not love him, but if he really wanted me, I tried to become a good wife. We were married, but I never had a chance to be anything to him. Now," she added, "you know why I will have no use for Castle and why he wants me out of the country." "How'd you meet him in the first place?" "My father died, and he did not leave me very much. I had friends back east who knew Reed Castle, and they told him about me and sent him a picture. He proposed by mail. It seemed all very romantic, a handsome western rancher and all that. Why did you suggest I might not own the place?" "You own half of it. I own the other half." "I filed a claim on the land that lies alongside of your ranch. You see, George gave me money when we were married, but he did not have all that much, but he did not want me to feel bound, and if I was unhappy, I could leave whenever I wished. After George disappeared, Reed came forward with a bill of sale and claimed the ranch. He said George had changed his mind about being married to me, had sold the ranch and skipped out. I did not believe a word of it, but I could prove nothing. Everybody was feeling very sorry for me, but after all, I known George but a few days, and he might have decided marriage was not for him. I could prove nothing." But you stayed on? There was nowhere to go. George might reappear. And then George would have told me you were coming. She paused. Did George ever mention a sober strike? Not far from here? Silver, he frowned, trying to think back. There had been a number of letters early on. No, I don't think so. They indicated the bunkhouse where the Indian had gone. What about Patch? Where's he fit in? I don't know. Honestly, I don't. He rode in one day on a flea-bitten roan pony and wanted to work for me. I did need help, but had so little money. He told me he wanted to work for me and I could pay him when I wished. Since then, he had worked hard and has been loyal too. Only when Reed Castle was around, he might get sight of. He always gets out of sight. I think he may be afraid of him. Why do you call him Patch? Is he an Apache? He is, but he would give no name, so I began calling him that. There was no accounting for Indians. They had their own ideas and followed them. Few Apaches could found this far north and west, for they loved their southwestern desert country, but there were no wanderers from all tribes. Castle was no fool. Crooked as he might be, but he was also intelligent and shrewd, and the two were rarely the same thing. He would know if any bill was sale he might have would be an obvious forgery, so he must have other irons in the fire. Of course, he knew George Lachlan was dead, and he had nothing to worry about until now. Jim Lachlan wanted more than simply to recover the ranch. He wanted to face the man who had killed George. At this date, the proof would be hard to come by, but the more he thought about it, the more he wondered. George had always been a thorough man who had left little to chance, and he lived long enough to reach the cave at Savory Creek. As he certainly had not lived with that hole in his head, he must have received a spinal wound first, but had somehow kept going until he reached the cave. He had undoubtedly been helpless when he was killed, but had he been helpless when he arrived? How much time had he had before his lower limbs became paralyzed? With a growing feeling of excitement, Jim Lachlan had got up and went to the bunkhouse. His brother had always been one to communicate. He always left messages behind him. One never had to guess with George. He always had a plan. There had been a hollow in the rocks on the old L bar, but there had been a rock under a tree on the way to Toyabe where they exchanged messages. So why not now of all times? If he struggled to reach that cave with almost last strength, it must have been done on purpose. Excited though he was, he finally dropped off. Tired from travel, he slept deeply. He awakened at daybreak in angry voices. Hurriedly, he threw on some clothing and, grabbing his rifle, went to the door. His breath caught sharply as he saw Ives and several of his riders. Patch was nowhere in sight, but one of Ives' men had a rifle and pike and army. Resting his rifle against the door jamb, he called out, "Looking for me, Burley? I'm right here." Ives turned sharply in the saddle, but only the rifle indicated Lachlan's presence, and the rifle was aimed at him. The bunkhouse walls were too solid to shoot through, and Ives was no longer in command of the situation. If shooting started, it was quite obvious we would get shot first. A rattle of horse hooves and distracted his attention, and when Lachlan followed Burley's gaze, he saw half a dozen riders led by a square-built, oldish man with a white mustache. "What's going on, Burley?" "What's going on here, Burley? You're not going to make some trouble for that girl while I'm around." "You can keep out of this, John. I came here to settle things with this here Lachlan." Jim put down the rifle and reached to the empty upper bunk for the shotgun he left there. "If you want to settle things with me, why bring out your whole outfit?" He stepped out of the yard. "Or do you think you'll need all that to help to handle one man? Put down that shotgun and I'll break you in half." Lachlan handed the shotgun to Pike. "Get down off that horse and we'll see." He glanced at the white-haired man. "I take it you are John Shippey? Will you see that I get fair play?" "You're a darn tootin' I will." He waved a hand. "Everybody stand back and let me have at it. Anybody who tries to interfere with me will settle with me. Burley unbuckled his gun belt with great good humor and hung them on the saddle horn. Having little stomach for gunfights, he relished a chance to use his fist. That he never had been whipped had helped him to anticipate the fight. I'll make two of you, son. Look at the size of... Pike protested. Look at the size of him. Lachlan ignored him. He was intent upon Ives now and thinking only of him. He moved in swiftly. He circled warily. It was obvious that from Burley's manner that he was no stranger to fighting. Yet when the big man moved, his first tentative blow was short. Lachlan feigned a move, sidestepped quickly, and smashed Ives in the mouth. The blow landed solidly, and blood splashed from badly cut lips. Lachlan started to draw away, and it was all that saved him. A hard right on the ear knocked him staggering, and Burley rushed, his greater height, weight, and reach driving Lachlan back, off balance. Jim landed a couple of ineffective blows to the body. Jim caught a hard blow and went down. Ives, carried forward by the impetus of his rush, tried a hasty kick and missed. Lachlan came up fast, his head still buzzing from the blow he caught, and he went down under a left and smashed both hands to the body. Neither man knew more of fighting than what they had learned by applying it, but both were skilled in the rough and tumble style of the frontier, which they had been using since boyhood. Lachlan bored in, went under with a swing with the right to the body, then an overhand that left that split Ives' ear and staggered him. Instantly, Lachlan was on him, his blows ripping and slashing at the bigger man. Ives struggled to get set, his striking back with heavy, ponderous blows. Suddenly, Lachlan ceased to punch and, diving low, grabbed Ives around the knees and upended him. Ives hit the dirt with a thud, but he rolled over like a cat and came to his feet. Jim was set for him and caught him with a hard right that cracked like a ball bat. Then Jim rushed in close and began to batter at Ives' body. Ives was badly cut, and one of his eyes almost closed. Yet Lachlan was weary simply from punching and holding the larger man off. He put his head on the bigger man's chest and punched at his body with both hands. Ives, an old riverboat fighter, stabbed at his eyes with stiff thumb. But Lachlan dropped his head to Ives' chest again and suddenly smashed upward with his head, butting him on the chin. Ives staggered, and Lachlan swung with both fists for his chin, left and right. Ives went down hard. He got up slowly, wearily. Jim Lachlan had backed off, gasping for breath. He started a circle. His foot slipped, and Ives grabbed him in a bear hug, forcing him back. Excruciating pain stabbed him, and Jim fought desperately to free himself, knowing the larger man was strong enough to break his back. Suddenly, Jim deliberately threw himself backward. He hit the ground hard, but it broke Ives' hold, and Jim got to his feet. Ives dove at him to bring it back again, and Lachlan met the dive by jerking up to his knees into Ives' face. The big man went to hands and knees, his features a blur of blood. Lachlan waited, gasping. Ives started to rise, and Lachlan moved in. A left and right, and a terrific right uppercut that snapped the big man's head back. He went to his knees and toppled over the grass. Jim staggered back, his jaw hanging as he gasped for breath, waiting for Ives to rise. "Let him go, Lachlan," Jim Shippey said. "He's whipped." Then he added, "I never thought I'd see the day." Seated in the kitchen, Army bathed Lachlan's face, tenderly wiping the blood from his features. "You got some bad cuts," he protested. "They'll heal," he said. "They always did before." Pike was explaining the situation to Shippey. He'd gotten George Lachlan's letters from a saddlebag and showed them to the rancher. "Those were writ by no man who thought of selling," Pike insisted. Lachlan pushed Army's hands gently aside. He got to his feet, staggering a little. His big hands were swollen and battered. Shippy, I won't get into town in time. It would be a favor if you ride in and hold Burton Castle until I get there. Nearly Pike will ride with you. Where are you going? Pike demanded. I've had a thought, and if I'm right, we'll have a killer. Jim Shippy nodded his head. I'll do my best. He turned suddenly to Pike. Where do you get a name like that? Well, it was like this here, Mr. Shippy. My folks was named Pike. We headed west from Kentucky to from Missouri. Being named Pike, we figured to live in Pike County, and I was born there. Well, we didn't make it. I was to be born there. But we didn't make it. We had to stop some miles short, so they named me for it. Nearly Pike. Army was looking at Lachlan, an odd light in her eyes. A look of something close to fear. Women, Jim reflected, would never understand a man's fighting. Ives slowly got to his feet, staggered a little, and then stood erect. His face was a mask of blood and dirt. He leaned against his horse for a moment and hoisted himself into the saddle. He said nothing until he gathered the reins. You're a hard man, Lachlan, he said grudgingly. I reckon I bit off more than I could chaw. Lachlan watched him go, then turned his horse, which Pike had saddled and ready. Army came to him. Don't go, Jim. I'm afraid, and you're in no good shape to go. He tried to smile, but his face was too swollen. He leaned over and tried a hand on her shoulder. You ride to town with them. Stay close to Pike. This is something I must do. Jim Lachlan rode toward Antelope Valley and then took a dim trail up to the bench. He rode through the pines, his face throbbing with every hoofbeat, his ribs aching from the bruises. His head ached and the sun was hot. At Butler Creek, he dropped on his face and drank deep of the clear, cold mountain water. Then he bathed his face with it. Rising, he glimpsed the tracks of two people across the narrow stream. Crossing on scattered rocks in the stream bed, he studied the tracks with care. Some were fresh, yet others were older. Obviously, whoever they were met here several times. Some cowhand with his girl, no doubt. He went back across the stream to his horse, but as he started to mount, the combination of sun and the fighting proved too much. He backed up and sat down on the grass. Then he dragged himself back into the shade and slept. He awakened suddenly. A glance at the sun told him that he had slept off for an hour. Yet, despite this, the fact that his head still throbbed, he felt better. Later, he cut the tracks of one rider heading toward Horse Heaven. The tracks were several days old. He turned in the canyon of the Savory and almost at once was enclosed by towering walls. And the sound of the stream rose in volume. Then the canyon widened, and before him was a sandy shelf strewn with the gray bones of ancient trees. Beyond it, the cave. Swinging down, he leaned against the saddle to still the momentary dizziness that beset him. Then he walked up to the cave. He stopped then quite abruptly, his mouth dry, but his brain sharply alert. He was looking into the peculiar white-gray eyes of Chance Varro. There was a taunting triumph in Varro's eyes. Took you long enough to get here, long enough so I could beat you to it. Now you can die the way your brother died. Funny, you blaming Reed Castle. He had the idea all right, but we beat him to it. You killed George? Even as he spoke, he was thinking less of what he was saying than more of his own swollen, battered hands and gun-slit deafness of the man he faced. Sure. At least I finished him off. He was already down and crippled. Reed wanted that ranch all right, but he was trying to work out some way of getting it. Well, we wasted no time. He could have the ranch because we knew of that silver strike he made near Bald Mountain. We gambled on it, and now we've won. Are you sure? Why not? Nobody knows if I'm in this but Bree Castle when he wouldn't talk. If he did, nobody would believe him. Your coming upset things, but that's ended now. Lachlan's mind was working swiftly. Who did he mean by we? How had Vero known he would be coming to the cave? Eyes, probably. But why in all this time had they not taken possession of the silver strike, sold it, and skipped? The reason was obvious. They didn't know where it was.